Welcome to another episode of the Director Series, and this week we are talking about the one, the only, Wes Craven. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already to never miss an episode. We have daily content including movie reviews, movie news, and so much more, so go ahead and hit that subscribe button to never miss a video. Today's video we are talking about the top 5 films from the legendary director Wes Craven. Now, with a filmography so long, it's kind of a challenge, if you will, to pick 5 films from this filmmaker that I feel are top tier and really sum up his career, or 5 films I feel like everybody should see because they hold importance to his career. Now, I'm going to start by saying I absolutely love Wes Craven. He was one of my favorite directors since I was a kid. He was one of the first people I ever actually watched the movie and actually looked at the back and read the description, and it's shown that it was directed by Wes Craven. And I even seen, written by Wes Craven. That was my first time of really kind of seeing who the director was and what that really meant, and even paying attention to that detail. And I'm not going to say I dived deep into it in that first moment. Like, I think I was probably in the 5th grade, around that time when I got the box set for Wes Craven's Nightmare on Elm Street. And I was sitting there watching the movies, and I was sitting there looking at the back, and I was just so engaged and so just obsessed with the Nightmare on Elm Street film series that I was watching the commentary. I was diving deep into it, and that's kind of where I first kind of learned about the director role and who a director is. And Wes Craven is that first person who really ever stood out to me as being a director, and one who I kind of wanted to see more films by, or more films he did, before even getting into like the film nerd, or becoming a cinephile and really diving deep into it. So with that being said, I feel like I want to take a moment just to kind of talk about his career in a brief summary. Now, Wes Craven wrote, directed, produced. He even went as far as he wrote a novel. I always do have the novel. I haven't finished it yet, but definitely I got to get back to finishing that. But he wrote a novel. He had a very lavishing career, but also a very hard career at the same time, because throughout his entire career, he mostly only did horror films. That's what he was known for. Now, he actually did direct a love story for Miramax back in 1997, I think it was, on Meryl Streep. It was in like the 90s. I want to say it might have been right before Scream or right after Scream. I can't remember the exact year. But that was the only time he ever directed a film outside of horror. But he always kind of directed films, too, that were either horror comedy, or like thrillers. Because you have films like Red Eye, which is more of a thriller than it really is a horror film, but it still kind of falls under the horror genre, which is not one of the 5 films I want to talk about, although that was on the list there for a minute, and I was like really kind of hard to decide which 5 films were going to be on the list. That one was there for a while. It was on my top 5 list, and then I took it off for something else. Some movies that I already mentioned, because he is the master of horror up there with John Carpenter, as being one of the greatest horror filmmakers to ever live, or to ever, work in the genre. Now, a lot of things that people don't understand or know about Wes Craven is that not all of his films were successful, and people don't realize how many films he actually made. And, for a while, he actually has in his filmography more misses than hits, and which is kind of odd, because usually people of his stature generally has a very solid filmography, but he actually has more misses than hits, which is really kind of inspirational, if you will. You can still make a lot of garbage films and become an icon. But part of the reason I'm going to talk about that, though, is people say, he made a lot of bad movies. But when he hit, he fucking hit. I mean, he would not only just hit a home run. I mean, he would hit Game 6 home runs. When he did it, he had multiple Game 6 moments in his career, and that's what kind of made him who he is, or it gave him the legacy that he has. Now, if you don't know what Game 6 is, I'm not really familiar with it either. I think it was Boston was playing the World Series in 1988, maybe 89, 87, somewhere around there. If you watch Go Will Hunting, there is the Game 6 reference. When he hits the home run, everybody's cheering. It's it's a big moment in Boston history. Don't watch baseball, couldn't tell you. But the relevance is the Game 6 moment. And there is even references in the show Entourage where they have the Game 6 moment. Lo and behold, when he hit. He made iconic characters. I feel like he has some of the most iconic horror characters that are present today. And we're going to start off with his most iconic, Freddy Krueger. And the first film on his top 5 list is A Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, this is a film that was a huge hit, so much so that it spawned like 9 sequels, a reboot, got a TV series. I mean, it's made Robert Englund one of the most sought after horror actors and icons in the genre. Like, and again, I'm not saying there aren't other horror icons in the genre as far as who are sought after. You know, you have Dick Warlock, who has played Michael Myers in Halloween 2, which a lot of people loved him and his performance. And there are other other people who played iconic roles or iconic horror characters that, you know, people really love and adore, are people who have their favorite Jason or their favorite Michael Myers. But Robert Englund is Freddy Krueger. He was Freddy Krueger from day one, and he was Freddy Krueger up to 2010 when they recast the role in the remake, which everybody completely shit on, and it kind of completely was the biggest failure in horror remake history, probably. I don't think there was a remake of a horror film that went worse than that one, just because of how iconic the character is, how much love there is for Robert Englund. I go to a lot of horror conventions, and to meet Robert Englund is like damn near impossible, because people constantly go see him constantly, and they constantly want to see him. I've seen people say, oh, they've seen him 3 and 4 times. They met him a couple times. They got autographs by him a couple times. He's like one of the most sought after actors of the genre, and he has created an icon that I don't think will ever truly die. Like, even after, you know, these films are so huge and so ingrained in the horror community that franchise is never going to die. And I think that's a film Wes Craven both wrote and directed, and a character that he brought and really came back to over the years. He didn't direct the sequel because him and the producer got into it, had completely different visions on how they want the first one to end, and there was a whole backstory with that. So he didn't like the producer, so he didn't end up coming back to direct the film Nightmare on Elm Street. I want to say until 5 or 6 when he came back finally. But again, like, you know, he just created an iconic character, Freddy Krueger, and Nightmare on Elm Street is to this day still an iconic film. The next one, talk about iconic films that have lived on and will withstand the test of time. We are talking about the 1996 film Scream. Now, this is a film that has changed the horror genre and even rebirthed the genre, because nobody in the 90s were making horror films. I mean, they were, but they weren't good, and they were just kind of, horror was dead by 95. Now, again, this has been a huge thing in the horror community that, you know, horror in the 90s was dead before Scream came back around and revitalized it. And I feel like there is one film that kind of really stands out for me that came out before Scream, but it came out at a time when horror was dead and nobody really saw it, which gives the film a bad rap, and that is Candyman. It came out in 1993. Horror, by that point, I feel like it was kind of dead, and Candyman was one of those films that was really great. It just didn't get the recognition it deserved or the ambiance that it should have gotten, because it was just came out too soon or too late. It missed the peak of the 80s, and it wasn't there yet for the revival, which Scream was, you know, the revival of horror in the 90s. It was such a popular film. It came out in December of 96. They actually was still in theaters in March of 97 when they went into production on Scream 2, which is a huge deal by any extent. Now, again, I was alive at that time when Scream came out, although I wasn't old enough to see the film in theaters when it came out. However, I'm actually super stoked because there is a screening of it at the Alamo Drafthouse in 2 weeks. That I'm going to take us for. Super stoked to go see this live in the theater. I've seen Scream 4, 5, and 6 in theaters. Can't wait to see 7. Still stoked for that. And again, this is one of those films where I kind of point this out, is that Craven directed the first 4 films. He sadly passed away before 5 and 6 were made. But I feel like, this franchise still is a solid franchise. There is not a bad movie in the franchise. And that's something that a lot of horror films can't say, or a lot of franchises can't say. They don't have a bad film. Again, everybody has their favorite Scream and their least favorite Scream, and ones they think aren't as good as the others. but there is not a bad Scream movie. Scream 7's coming out next year, and I'm super stoked for it. It could be that Scream that does us in as a franchise, but fingers crossed, hope it's still going to be great. And with that being said, I mean, Scream and Nightmare on Elm Street, they speak for themselves. These are iconic films that are two of the most iconic horror characters, or they gave us two of the most iconic horror characters that are in the industry or in the genre today. Now, kind of my third film I want to talk about is one that I feel came and went, didn't get the recognition it deserved, is a sleeper horror film that he wrote and directed, Wes Craven, and it hit, but it didn't really ever hit a status in which I feel like people don't talk about it today, and that's nobody's top 10 horror films. I haven't seen anybody talk about it for the 31 films of Halloween. It's one of those films that I feel like definitely holds a special place with me, and I feel like definitely needs to be on the radar, and more people need to talk about this film, and that is My Soul to Take. It came out in 2010. It was an original film by Craven. He wrote it, directed it. It was an original horror film, and it was phenomenal. I honestly haven't seen it in a while. I haven't revisited it in a while, but I got to revisit this one soon. I plan on rewatching it this year for the 31 films of Halloween. Probably be dropping that series. Tomorrow's October 1st. So we're going to be dropping the 31 films of Halloween sooner rather than later. And that's definitely going to be on my list because I absolutely love that movie. And I feel like it's one that kind of was a sleeper film within itself, because we kind of, in the 2010 era, we were starting to get into the paranormal. It came out at a time when, the Paranormal Activity movies, the found footage, the ghost stories, they were like a big deal. Paranormal Activity, Insidious, that was kind of the realm in which people were really focusing on, especially found footage. And this film was neither of those. It was a supernatural film, or about a supernatural killer, but it wasn't a paranormal film. It wasn't a ghost story. It wasn't found footage. So it kind of didn't fall in that popular subgenre of horror that was kind of taking over at the time. So I feel like it definitely fell under the radar and just kind of got missed by a lot of people in the genre, or a lot of fans in the horror community, and haven't really gotten its heyday yet. So that's a film I definitely recommend people check out. My fourth film on the list takes it back to 1972. This is a film that was his first film he ever made, his directorial debut, and it was a film that was very much dark, gritty, or not even gritty, it was just dark. And it was so much so that I remember watching an interview with Wes Craven. He said after they filmed the one scene, one of the key scenes in the entire plot of the film, they broke for lunch after that, and nobody could eat. It was so graphic and disturbing. And he said nobody has made a film like that up until that point in horror. And it was something that really was disturbing. And a lot of things kind of want to touch on too. If you look at like Nightmare on Elm Street, Scream, they were more campish and more fun. I mean, they're horror films and they're slashers. But if you look at his early work, like The Last House on the Left, it's so much darker and so much gruesome, or more gruesome, that as his career went on, he still made horror films, but they got less and less horrendous and then became more fun. And again, Scream, Nightmare on Elm Street, these films kind of came more of self-awareness, kind of playing on the genre. It kind of mixed in horror, and you had these witty like lines of dialogue, whereas his early films like The Last House on the Left and The Hills Have Eyes, they're these really dark, gritty films that was so much on the other spectrum of horror that it definitely was a different type of horror film that really kind of taken off his career, but also changed how horror films are made, or even the tone of horror films. And speaking on that, my final film on this list, and one that I absolutely adore, and again, it's one of the ones I haven't seen in a while, definitely need to rewatch, and that is the 1990s film, The People Under the Stairs. I want to say this came out in 1991, if I'm not mistaken. And this is a horror film, but it's, well, again, that complete different spectrum of horror. It's more of a horror comedy. It's kind of a little batshit crazy, but in the best possible way. It's almost like Don't Breathe, but a more fun version. It's like the stream version of Don't Breathe. Like Don't Breathe, almost like a remake of The People Under the Stairs, because The People Under the Stairs was about a group of neighborhood guys who, really it was two guys and a little brother, who were going to break into this house that was like the richest house in the neighborhood. They apparently had gold hidden in their basement, and they were gonna break into the house and steal their wealth, because it was like everybody in the neighborhood was, I believe, was poor, and there was just one house. They had all this money and everything like that. They were like really rich, and you could just kind of tell by the house. And they break into the house to rob the place, and everything goes wrong, and these people are not what they seem to be, and it's just kind of like batshit crazy. Like, there's actually people living in. They have like people in the basement, and I don't want to spoil anything because you definitely gotta watch it. But it's so much more on that fun side of horror, because it doesn't get as dark and gruesome. It's kind of fun with it, and again, it kind of shows that turning point in his career. And I feel like The People on the Stairs, again, is one of those films that not a lot of people talk about. Like, people who know the film love it. Guy we used to hang out with, we're at some manager movie stop. I used to hang out in this movie stop for hours, talk movies. And this was like the late 2010s. It was like 2012, probably 2011, 2012. I started hanging out there, and I hung out there probably for years, just hanging out, talking movies all the time. And People Under the Stairs was, we were talking about when Don't Breathe came out, and he was like, yeah, I like the better one was People Under the Stairs, because it was so much so that this movie had that impact on the horror community at the time. But I feel like it's kind of been lost in the shuffle, and it hasn't come back to resurface to the next generation of horror fans, and I feel like nobody really talks about it, and it's kind of falling off people's radar. One in which I feel like people definitely need to check out, and I feel like I'm going to definitely preach for people to see this movie. Definitely do an episode in 31 Films of Halloween that we're going to be dropping this October. People Under the Stairs, absolutely love it. Again, it's original, it's fun, it's a horror film, but it kind of has more of that fun aspect. So it kind of shows his peak in his career, where he kind of goes from really, really gruesome to more fun kind of horror. And he has films in there that are a little bit more gruesome as his career went on. Like My Soul to Take, which came out in 2010, wasn't really it wasn't that goofy-ish kind of scream horror. It kind of went him going back more to his roots of a more grittier, gruesome horror film. But it wasn't as dark, or it wasn't as gruesome as the Last House on the Left, The Hills Have Eyes, which to modern audiences may not seem that gruesome, but at the time they were like films that nobody were making. And I feel like that might be too why My Soul to Take, it's more on that line of dark and gritty and gruesome, but it doesn't feel as as horrifying as his original films, because by this point in time in 2010, we have so many more films that have crossed that point. Hostel, Saw, we have these really bloody, gruesome films that taking it way past, the point in which horror has become almost like they call it torture porn. And I don't call it that, but that is the name in which some give that subgenre of horror that really took it to another extreme, which made My Soul to Take feel less impact or less gruesome and less extreme. So with that being said, that brings us to the end of this episode. And there are my 5 films that I recommend from Wes Craven. And then, again, we're going to October 1st. What better time to jump into some great horror films than October? What are your thoughts? Comment below. Let me know. What are your favorite 5 Wes Craven films?